Reading cards really is an art form, and it takes a little while to master it. So the first task of the tarot student is to be able to analyze each individual card meaning and memorize the meanings of the positions in which the cards fall in any particular tarot spread. To be a really good tarot reader, you're eventually going to have to get to a place where you can start beginning to integrate the reading into a more holistic coaching experience. So assessing the elements to get the big picture above all is going to be one really good tool in which you can begin that integration process. Without even reading the individual cards, the elemental assessment can give you a lot of information. So we've already seen that in the previous section. In the same way, learning to integrate your card positions and learning to see how the cards interrelate to each other is also going to take quite a bit of practice and time to master, and it's one of the things I'm going to be teaching in depth in the online course. For the purpose here for this webinar, I want to give you some simple guidelines though for creating a better, more holistic experience for your client when they come to you for a reading. So a really good tarot reading has to have the following components. The first one is they need clarity on the question that they're bringing to the table. The second component is going to be that the tarot spread that you're using has to be relevant to the question that's being asked. The third component is that it's really helpful for you to be solution-oriented in your readings. The fourth element is that your client is probably going to require your guidance in terms of some action steps and some homework assignments to take home with them after the reading. And the fifth component is the ability to give adequate closure to your reading. So let's start with clarifying the question. This is going to be really important because if a person doesn't have a really clear question about why they're there getting the reading in the first place, it's going to be a muddled reading. And I've had some personal experiences of having some problems with this in terms of unhappy customers. So here's what usually happens in my experience when somebody comes in and the first thing they say is, well, I want a reading, but I'm not really sure if I should get one, and I kind of have this thing going on, but I don't know if I really should have a reading or not. And so they wander around and they think about it, and maybe they decide, well, maybe I should just get the reading, and they sit down and they're kind of unhappy to begin with. And then we end up doing the reading, and the reading ends up being really confused and really muddled, or I end up telling them something that they don't want to hear because they're not really ready to hear it, because the inability to clarify the question is really a well-disguised way of saying subconsciously that they're resistant to the answers that they already know are coming. And that puts you as the reader in a bit of a difficult position because, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have a clear question, you're not going to have a clear reading, and then your client's just going to be frustrated because you're not telling them anything that's actually helpful. But what they don't understand is that the cards are reflecting their own subconscious inability to ask a focused question. And that's not necessarily your fault as a tarot reader, because the cards are a snapshot of what's going on in their subconscious mind. And the second possibility is that if they're resistant to getting the reading and they feel like they kind of have to, or they somehow feel obligated to, and then they get an answer that they don't like, then they have an excuse to be angry and to start taking out their aggressions on you. And all of the really bad readings I've done in terms of having a bad experience between myself and the client, I have noticed this pattern that they usually either don't have a well thought out question to begin with, or they don't want the reading because they already know what the answer is. They just don't like it, and they don't want to have to face it, and they don't want to have to come to terms with it, and the cards aren't going to lie to them. So in the first case, you're just either going to get a confused reading that was pointless, and in the second case, that individual is going to be given an excuse to use you as their punching bag. So to kind of nip that problem in the bud, I've learned that when a client has a hesitation about coming to the reading in the first place, I usually recommend that they don't do it. Tell them to come back later when they're feeling more sure about the process. That's really the best way to handle that situation. And that's going to avoid, the muddles and the mistakes, and it's going to avoid any hard feelings and any unhappy customers in the long run. So that's the first component, and possibly the most important one in terms of your customer relations. So the second component is about your tarot spread. So the tarot spread that you use has to be relevant to the question that is presented. So for general purposes, the Celtic cross reading is the classic 10-card tarot spread that most everyone learns how to do readings with. And this layout is pretty sufficient to read for just about any question or topic. But as you get more experienced, you're probably going to want to experiment with different tarot spreads, and possibly even experiment with starting to create some of your own tarot layouts for very specific types of scenarios that maybe you specialize in terms of your coaching skills. So you as a reader must develop a connection with your client by actually addressing the problem the client is presenting. If the client has a specific question or issue, what you want to try to do is avoid telling them a bunch of stuff that you might see in the cards that isn't really relevant to what they're asking. And I've seen that happen in some readings. There's some readers who aren't very experienced, and they're going to struggle with this a little bit, and that's okay. It's part of the learning process. But if you're charging money for your readings, you're really going to want to have a game plan for actually helping your client. So it's important to address the questions or concerns that the client is actually bringing to the table. There are some situations where the reading may take a detour from the question presented, and there's a way to handle this, and that's okay as long as you remember to integrate the question initially and explain why the detour is happening. This is sometimes really confusing because the detour, and what I mean by detour is the irrelevant things that you may see in the actual reading itself that have nothing to do with the question that the client was asking. The detour will probably always have something to do with the question on some level, but it's going to be indirect and a little more subconscious. So the trick is to tie it all in for the client in a meaningful way. Maybe the detour indicates that other things need to happen before the particular issue they're asking about can be handled or addressed. So a good example of this might be if a client has a relationship question. When am I going to find love? Well, finding love isn't always that simple. Sometimes finding love has a lot more to do with learning to love yourself first, cleaning up any loose ends and emotional ties, or handling your feelings about your ex-partners first. So if the reading is about finding a new relationship, but it's cluttered with a bunch of other stuff, then you will have to figure out a way to tactfully explain to the client that, hey, you've got some homework to do here before that law of attraction is going to kick in for you and bring the relationship that you want. So then you're going to have to go about explaining what you see in the context of why those things have to happen first before their ultimate goal can come to fruition. Maybe the detour indicates that what is sought after isn't meant for the person at this time. Maybe the detour indicates that there are more immediately pressing needs than what the client wants at this time. So feel free to take the detour, but always explain why the seeming irrelevant information is part of the bigger picture. And this is where your coaching skills will come in handy. I'll give you one short example that came across my table very recently, actually when I was working on a hotline. I had a lady who, she wanted to know if her husband was seeing somebody else and what to do about the relationship issue. And when I looked at the cards, I had to explain to her, I said, well, the immediate blockage that I see in the relationship has more to do with money than anything else. And so I asked her, I said, are you having some difficulty with money problems in your marriage at this time? And she said, yeah, we fight about money all the time. And I said, well, this is the root of your problem right here, because I don't see any indication that your husband is actively seeing anybody else at this time. But if this problem goes on and if he's unhappy, I can see where he might be considering the possibilities. So you might want to be opening up some lines of communication there and seeing if you can get down to the nitty-gritty of your money problems and change the dynamic of your relationship and create some more harmony, and then you probably won't have to worry about it. So that's one example of how the reading began about the question of infidelity or the question of having an affair, but the actual root of the problem was the financial stress in the marriage. So you know, if you look at it from that way, you can tie it all in for the client with a big pretty bow and give them a little bit of a game plan to go about trying to fix the problem that they're coming to you with. If you're using other tarot spreads besides the Celtic Cross spread, then just make sure that the spread you're using is applicable to the situations. There's a lot of different tarot layouts for relationships specifically, and in my toolbox I have several different reading layouts on my menu for different purposes, some of which I'm going to be sharing with you in the online course. So the next component to a good reading is to be solution-oriented, which the example that I gave you above is kind of a little example of that. So the goal of every reading should be to make your client feel better or to help provide some kind of a solution to the problem they present. So if the reader can't do this, there really isn't a whole lot of point in having a reading unless they're just in it for the entertainment purpose, which I really personally don't recommend too much. But if you can try to stay solution oriented in your readings whenever possible, it's best. Otherwise, you may have a very nervous or frightened or disappointed client leaving your reading table if they don't really leave feeling any better than when they came in. And one of the things I recommend is to try to avoid fatalistic doom and gloom predictions when and where possible. So yeah, there's going to be some readings where the client will not get what they want. Love and relationship readings are notorious for this, and the reason for that is because people make really bad choices in partners. And the cards are always going to reflect the bad choices that people make. So when you find you have to deliver bad news, try to find the silver lining somewhere. And, you know, this thing won't work out because something else much better is coming. Or this thing won't work out because you are now being called to level up your self-esteem and demand to be treated better than what you have right now going on for you. When and where possible, if the client is not too resistant, I always try to direct the client to a better quality of life if they're willing and if they're open to it. Sometimes they're not going to be willing, and sometimes the resistance and the obsession about the current unhealthy situation is just going to be too strong, and there's some people that you just can't do a lot with. And, you know, that's when you just have to do what you can and let the rest of it go. In which case, sometimes you just have to sit with them in the dark and acknowledge that things aren't feeling good right now, and, you know, tell them eventually it'll get better, but in the meantime, this is where it's at, so it looks like you're just going to kind of have to deal with it. But it's up to you as a reader to find some kind of creative way to leave your client feeling a sense of hope, hopefully, when the reading is over, no matter what the outcome of the reading happens to be. Offering action steps is really helpful. Sometimes it's not enough to tell someone what it is that they want is actually coming, because the universe cooperates with co-creators. Some people need a push, and some people need to be motivated to take action in order to achieve what the universe wants to give them. This thing is coming your way, but only if you make the effort to work toward it and focus on it. So if the client doesn't know how to manifest what they want, you can try to give them some step-by-step suggestions on how to get there. What's the first thing that needs to happen to get what you want? Do you need more money? Do you need a job? Do you need more education? Do you need to have assistance from certain people? In order to get to the goal, you have to understand what it takes to get there and the tools that you need to make it happen. The reading will help you identify the resistance to success and what the blockage are, and the conflicts and the obstacles that may be hindering the client in moving forward towards the ideal scenario. So your job as a reader is not so much to focus on the outcome of the reading, but to help the client navigate the obstacles that are presented within it. Don't just tell someone this thing is preventing you from succeeding. When you identify the blockage, try to get your client to dig a little deeper into the root of the conflict and find out what can actually be done about it. What are the things that the client actually has in their disposal right now that they can use to take action steps? What are the things that they don't have that they need to get somewhere else? Can you make any recommendations for them about their particular problem? Can you refer them to anybody that can help them? You know, having this repertoire of tools to give your clients is going to make you pretty popular for the people that are really working through some stuff, because they're going to feel like you're really there to help them. So, you know, what tools are required to remove the obstacle? Identify those things if you can, and have the client identify what they need. A lot of people come to a tarot reading because they have a problem, and they don't have the tools they need to handle the problem. They're looking for guidance, and they're looking for direction, and they're looking for hope. So put your problem-solving hat on, and if you can, help your client work these obstacles so that the final outcome of the reading can either actually manifest in the positive card that's sitting there waiting to happen, or so that you can actually change the outcome if it's a negative card and turn that negative into a positive at some time in the near future when you change the dynamic of how they're perceiving their situation. You're not going to be able to help everybody, but you're going to be able to help a lot of people make a dent in some of these issues that they're having. And there will be some readings that are beyond your scope to help, and you'll just have to take those as they come and don't worry about it too much, and try not to be too hard on yourself if you end up with a reading that doesn't go very well. It happens to us all. But you can focus on the people you can help and take the initiative to look for other ways to research, learn, and develop more coaching skills and more coaching tools to help your clients with their issues, because you will need those tools at some point. When you end up in a situation where you have a client coming to you with a problem that is entirely beyond your scope and beyond your qualifications, then I highly recommend having a referral list of more professional people that you can send them to, such as a psychiatrist or a counselor or a doctor or, you know, an attorney or something. You know, there's going to be certain things that you're just not going to be qualified to give them advice on. I've had a couple of those, and really the only thing you can really do with those is to sit and listen and be compassionate. But, you know, if you're in a situation like that, you're just going to have to be honest and say, you know, I really appreciate that you're having this problem. I don't have the first clue how to help you get through it. I would recommend that you seek assistance, you know, in this particular place or in this particular field, or, you know, I know a counselor that's really good. Maybe you should give them a call. They can probably help you with this a lot better than I could, and that sort of thing. So be responsible and know your limitations about what you can and can't help your clients with. And that's a big part of the ethics section I'm going to be covering also in the online course. Bringing closure to your readings is the final component that I'm going to talk about here. And a simple way that I like to end my readings is to ask the client if the reading experience feels complete for them before we end. So if there's something else that they needed to mention or talk about before the ending session, this is a good way to warn your client that their time is just about up. So if you're on the clock, you can stop them about 5 or 10 minutes before the session's over, before you need to end, and begin to slowly wrap things up. You can mention how much time is left. You can give them the option to purchase additional time with you if you don't have anyone else coming after them. Or one way or another, try to find some pleasant way to bring closure and try to end on a good note. This is going to be really important, and you're going to want to really hone your skill at this, because some people will just continue talking on and on and on and on and on and expect you to sit there, and they will have no respect for your time boundaries or for the fact that you have another appointment coming. So you have to really set the boundary on the time frame of your sessions, you know, especially if you've got other people coming after them. And don't let people take advantage of that, because they will sometimes. So this is a really good skill for any tarot reader to have, is to be able to politely say, our time is up, and, you know, or in 10 minutes our time is up, so what would you like to focus on for the next 10 minutes before we wrap this up? You can recap the action steps if you need to before they go, so that they have a game plan for moving forward while it's still fresh in their mind when they leave. You can take that last 5 or 10 minutes to let them write down any suggestions that you have for them, or any referral phone numbers or names that you want to send them to, or books that you can recommend that they read, or, you know, whatever it is. So that last 5 to 10 minutes is the wrap-up phase. Don't forget to keep a box of Kleenex at your reading table either. There's a lot of people, depending on what it is that they're talking about and what it is that they're trying to deal with, sometimes there's a lot of tears that happen in a reading, so that Kleenex box is really handy. Especially when you're digging into some of the deeper problems, you know, with regard to marital relationships or For example, I have a particular specialized reading that I do called the Oracle of the Dead, which is about helping people get closure for deceased family members or deceased pets, or, speaking to the dead, and being able to get information from them and being able to tell them and acknowledge what they never got to say. And these can be really emotional situations. So, yeah, Kleenex, it's your friend. And so now we're going to go on to the next section about the more of the controversial tarot cards.